Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm really excited to welcome to the show today a guest, Amy Rowlinson, who I've actually been on her podcast, and I was really interested in her story that she tells around purpose, around why, in her book, Focus on Why, which I've got my own copy here. So I'm really excited to explore with Amy today, what does legacy look like? What does purpose look like? And how do we really ensure that we live on purpose? Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you. And no pressure with those three topics, those three areas, right? This is going to be a very superficial topic. I'm sure people are thinking, oh, legacy, purpose. Yeah, easy.
Yeah, well, I love the fact we're going to get into some really deep conversations and some important conversations. So, Amy, why don't you open up by telling and sharing with us about who you are, the work that you do, and a little bit more about you.
Thank you. Well, my name is Amy Rowlinson, and I shine a light on what is possible when you focus on why. And what I mean by that is understanding just how important living with and working with purpose is, as opposed to just existing or living a life on autopilot. I'm sure we will talk more about the differences there that I've experienced in a moment or two. But what
Mm.
I have been focusing on for the last 5 years is this focus on why. And that has come through in different ways. It started with a podcast, it then has morphed into coaching, and finally a book and a mastermind. So, different ways of sharing that message with an audience, but really just embracing possibility, opportunity, and opening up people's perspectives and worlds to a different way of life. And that is just not the way, a way, and it's different for everyone. And that's what's so fabulous and fascinating about purpose, is that it is so unique to each and every person that I speak to or work with. And it's a case of understanding, taking responsibility, and understanding what fulfillment means to you. So, this has been a journey that I've experienced. And now, through my podcast and my coaching and my speaking areas, I am touching so many other different topics and experiencing what that means with so many people. The podcast has grown and it's now downloaded in 153 countries. So, what started out as being a lockdown project has certainly become a much bigger piece of work. And I know that it will be my life's work.
Wow. There is so much in there I want to ask you about straight away. But I can imagine that people who are listening to this, to watching this, I can imagine them really, particularly that part about being on autopilot, not really being conscious in the way that they are living. I can imagine there are lots of people who will be nodding along with that and saying, yeah, that's the tricky part of this. But let's start with, why does this matter to you personally? Because you've talked about the evolution in your work, how you came to, you came to this, and this has been a 5 year process for you. So I'm really interested, like, why does this matter to you?
It matters to me because I've experienced the difference between living with and living without purpose, not being aligned with my values, and living out other people's expectations. And it is so frustrating now that I can see that was what was happening, because I wasn't aware of it at the time. It happened when we were both, my husband and I were both working full time, and it was between 2014 and 2016 that this really came to its heights. And it was one day that my husband came home and I looked at him and I realized he is at absolute end of burnout. He was grey, he was ashen. I didn't recognize him, and I knew something had to change. And I did actually resign the next day. And I'm not advocating that that is the solution to any listener right now, but it was the right decision for us as a family. And I spent the best part of the next 3 years redefining what our lifestyle looked like to ensure that we were back on track to our original plans. We had a very clear vision, and at some point we drifted far, far away from that. And it was very much a case of being whipped into this lifestyle that wasn't us, in living in London, working in London, schools in and around London. And that lifestyle was a slow creep. And so it wasn't an overnight shift, but it was certainly, again, something that we hadn't really stopped to review. So, very consciously looking at what would serve us, what we needed, even doing a financial audit of what we actually needed from that perspective, we realized that we'd been chasing more than we actually even needed or needed for it to be sustainable, and also to enjoy, and for John to have more time with the family. It really did need to change. So I did set up a business. That business then allowed him to step away from working in the city. It was a 3-year process, but he had gone down part time in that process and his health did recover. So health was very much the driver for instigating a lifestyle change. And then purpose was something that I hadn't even been aware of, really, or if I had, it hadn't taken a front seat. And so understanding what I could do when I was aligned with my values, my core values, and understanding what the purpose was for us as a family and then individually, and how we could make sure that we are all having our needs met, was just such a enlightening piece of work. Personal development had kind of passed me by. I'd been raising children when those shelves in the bookshop had swollen, when people were going on personal development courses. I was at home with the children and doing projects on home renovations. So when I started to educate myself and really become aware on developing myself, that was an incredible journey. And that's one I now help others to experience too.
Amazing. And there's a couple of moments in that story you were telling about your very personal experience of this and the transitions, but the very active choices that you made. And you used the word lifestyle and creep. And these words really, I can imagine again that people connect with that idea that you do to some extent end up being not very conscious in the way you're living. Things just accelerate, escalate. People think about what it is they're not really sort of thinking about how things are happening. So for you that was about a choice to resign, to really shift things, and obviously it sounds like quite a big lifestyle choice in terms of where you're living, how you're working, what you're working on. But what about for people who are listening and watching this and thinking, well, I know this is something that resonates. This is something probably I need to think about, but where on earth do I begin? I don't even have I can imagine people saying, I don't even have a moment to think. So where do you even start with that process? Because it's deep work, right? It's quite tricky to do this and really do the thinking.
So if you don't have a moment to think, I would say you definitely need to work on this, because there is already an issue there in terms of being overwhelmed or not filling the time as you would want to choose. And this is what it is. It's a difference between filling in the moments and creating fulfilling moments. So understanding what it is that you want is just part of this journey, as opposed to what you don't want, which is what most people understand, those elements, but then they don't give themselves the time to really appreciate what it is that brings them fulfillment, to really understand what brings them joy. And there's this desire for purpose. How do I find my purpose? Is a question I get asked all the time. And that is probably where I help people to start, in understanding that purpose is not something that you find, it's something that you create and feel from within. So you're not going to find it externally. It is a case of really understanding what constitutes you as an individual. So challenging the status quo is doing a bit of an audit on your life and your lifestyle, your work. What is it that you're doing to live out other people's expectations? And what is it that you're doing for your own fulfillment? Now, again, as I said, I don't expect you to jump ship because you can actually find ways of aligning in your current role and meeting that. At the moment, Gallup State of the Workplace report 2025 said that 79% of the global workplace, between those who are not engaged or those who are actively disengaged, that is a huge number of people. That's almost 8 out of 10 who are not enjoying their work on a daily basis. Now, I have some theories, and I work with companies and individuals to understand how to become more fulfilled. And it works really well. It is about taking that personal responsibility and not outsourcing it to anybody else for your own understanding of what matters to you and how you see and how you attribute meaning to every moment. And that way you understand how that connects to the bigger picture. So, how your everyday tasks actually sit with your bigger purpose. So, in terms of understanding where to start, it's just doing an audit on how you're spending your time. And you can do that by literally clocking every moment of your day and seeing where you're spending it, and then looking at it and going, well, this is insane. This is
Mm.
not who I want to be, and this is not how I want to live.
I think that's a really, that's a really kind of practical way as well for somebody to start, right? And I'm also really aware that in the book, your book that you focus on why, you also talk about a particular framework, which I appreciate is quite detailed. We probably don't have time to go through all of it, but would you just talk us through some of those elements to help us understand here today, what else would be involved in really exploring this question more deeply?
Yeah, so the framework is 9 steps, and they are made up of three different areas. It's purpose, plan, and focus. And the first 3 steps are control, challenge, and capture. And they constitute how you are forming the foundation to understand what your purpose is. Controlling is, or control the controllables, is the first part. And it's really very straightforward. You will have heard control the controllables, to understand what you can control and then liberate yourself from what you can't. And that way, you're not trying to do things that you literally have no ability in changing the outcomes for. So it's about being present. It's about understanding what it is you can have an effect change with, to then understand, to challenge the status quo. This is part of the audit piece, is to understand who you are, what it is that you enjoy, what it is that you want to do, but have some clarity on how you're spending your time. The third part of that is to then capture the essence of you, and then to really live out with intention your daily activities in alignment with your values. Now, many people talk about core values, talk about values for a workplace, and these aren't something that you do as an exercise once and then file away. This is a lived experience. This is something you can use as a filter. Your values are very much the core decision making compass that will help you in every moment understand what doesn't feel right. Well, it's probably likely that one of them has been compromised. So those are the first 3 steps. It then goes on to the next phase, which is plan. And then with plan is around choosing your actions, creating and crafting a plan, and then collaborating so that you can amplify the impact that you're having. It's really about not going it alone. We are not designed to be on this planet individually. We're here as a collective, collaborative place where we can contribute. And that is where the purpose is really seen in serving others, and how we get so much fulfillment is through witnessing that and serving through the purpose activities that we focus on. The focus piece is contribute. It's committing to that purpose. It's contributing to what it is that you want to focus on, and then it's the change that you affect, but also the change that you see within yourself. So externally and internally, that is the steps that I have in the framework, and I take you through those with exercises.
Amazing. Wow. That sounds really comprehensive. And I love the way as well that it's it's focused around three areas, and then there are the steps behind that to really make that happen. And I found, when I looked through your book, I found it very practical, very easy to work through, in the sense of these are not easy questions and not easy exercises, but you've made it very clear about how to approach it. But here's the question, right, Amy? Like, is it, why have we some, and why do so many of us feel like we're disengaged, that we haven't got the purpose? Why are people feeling so lost? Is this something we used to have and we lost it? Or is it something that people just never really consciously thought of in the first place?
We're in a society where we are so busy, and we have most of our time is filled with traveling, with family life, with friends, with business, with work, with daily chores. And so every moment of our time is dictated to us mostly by commuting or washing or feeding or whatever it is. I mean, I'm a mum. I've got two grown-up children now, but it is a very busy time. So it's easy to serve others and to forget about what it is that we want, particularly as a working mum. What happens is you get into a set of habits that then become efficient for the running of that particular lifestyle. And then before you know it, as I said, it's that slow creep. It's a drift away from what initially matters. And so it doesn't happen overnight. But what does happen is there tends to be a wake up call, and that can be a catalyst to set you back on track. But going back to why are so many people disengaged, it, it's often a case of lots of different circumstances have attributed to this. This is not a single answer. For example, if you look at what happened in during COVID, there were many people who then had to work several other jobs just to make ends meet, and then that might have then become a habit that they've continued on with. There have been many different shift in circumstances since that time of working at home, which has shifted the entire way that we work and the communication. So there are many reasons that this is the case, but I do believe that there has been I don't even think it's a conscious awareness that this has happened, but there has been an outsourcing. We outsource a lot of our daily activities. We have things that make things a lot more efficient. We have a dishwasher or a washing machine. We used to spend a huge amount of time doing those things in the past, but now we have something else to do that. And it's almost become the same, that we've outsourced our fulfillment, and we've outsourced entertain me, put that role on the managers and the leaders in an organization to ensure that I'm motivated. It's outsourcing that into, right, well, they're paying me, they're giving me all of these perks, also make sure that I am fulfilled with that. And I think that that has become the case, and it is less so the case for those people who have set up their own companies. They've got different challenges, but they are definitely more fulfilled because they are focused on something that they really enjoy doing. But when you are looking at a job, you might think, well, maybe 80% of that I'm happy with, 20% not, but that's a whole day a week that you're not actually being productive. So this alignment is key to understand what your values are, and many people don't know what those are. So how can you possibly be fulfilled and understand what it is that you enjoy doing or is meaningful to you when you haven't got a measure that you're consciously scoring that with? And meaningful success is something I talk about, and how you measure and mark that doesn't need to be with the traditional metrics. It's very much a case of, how does this resonate with me? And that's the work I do, is help people to understand what's meaningful and what matters.
Oh, that sounds fun. I mean, it's just so rich, the things you're sharing here. And I think, this is something that is so important in this current moment in time. I agree with you. I equally see research that talks about not only disengagement, but leaning out of conversations, leaning out of communication. And, this is such a like current and present danger, right? Like our ability to connect, to be able to find purpose also through the way that you talked about collaboration earlier as well. So, Amy, I also want to touch on in this book, you talk about the generational wisdom and your very beautiful personal story and connection with the wisdom from your grandfather. And would you just sharing briefly here as well a little bit with our listeners about that story and how that came about and how that feeds into your work on purpose?
Yeah, this is something that I did not see coming. So I wanted to write a book. I had an idea to talk about purpose, but I didn't want to just contribute another personal development book to a already very, very packed shelf. And so it had to have some kind of unique spin on it. And I was working with a book coach, and I came up with this idea of writing from the perspective of my grandfather. He was incredibly instrumental when I probably up to about my first 22 years before he passed. And I spent almost every day with him. He was such a huge part of my life. He would help me with many areas of my schoolwork. He would even go to my school teacher parents evenings. He was very, very instrumental there. And so I thought, well, he was a great storyteller. Why don't I share some of the stories that he used to tell me? He was brilliant. He used to write plays for TV, radio, and stage, and he was just such a charismatic person. Why don't I use his voice? And so when I started writing, I was like, well, oh, no, I can't possibly write from his perspective. That was his absolute gift in the world. People would follow him from room to room just to be in his company at parties and sit at his feet while he was telling stories. Really was that kind of man. So no, I had huge imposter syndrome to try and articulate it through his voice and using his perspective. So I reached out to a coach and I said, help. I want to write this book. I want to involve my grandfather somehow. Please, can you help me? And she said, well, why don't you have a conversation with him? And she understood that he wasn't alive still. And I was like, oh, how's that possible? She was like, would you really willing to try? And I was like, absolutely. So I had a conversation with my late grandfather. This was in March 2022. So 2022. And yeah, I had a pep talk from my grandfather who told me to get on with it pretty much, that my podcasting was an extension of his broadcasting. It was just a medium that I was playing with in the same way that he used to play with and explore these mediums that he started from scratch and just kept on going, and iterations got better and better. And so, yeah, I'm fully aware that I was giving myself this pep talk. This really was me voicing both sides. But what I did realize is I actually had more of my grandfather in me than I realized. And he has been so influential and continues to be influential, even though he passed in 1996. So, we're always at that point, it was a considerable amount of time, 16 years later, and he's still there helping me with various things. So, yeah, well, no, not 16, way longer than that. So it was so, so important to me to involve him in this book. And then literally 10 days later, after I had that coaching call, my grandmother unexpectedly passed. And when I was going through her things, I found a book, which is a commonplace scrapbook dated September 39 to April 45. And in this book, it has his beautiful writing.
Oh,
And I
wow.
realized that this was a journal, a diary that he kept. Well, he calls it actually, he calls it his being notes, reminiscences, impressions, criticism, commentary, and work in progress or unfinished. He kept this book for 5 years during his time leading into the Second World War and being a prisoner of war, held in 4 different camps for the best part of 5 years. But when I opened this book, it fell on this page, which was September the 30th, 1942. Proposal to write way of life, to meet the need for a planned life, to meet every circumstance of life, every facet of living. So here I am, 80 years later, literally closing out every podcast that I have with have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. And he got there first. He was already writing about it. But it made me realize that there was more of him in me than I realized, and that he had had a huge influence. And then when I doubted whether I could use these words, whether it would be appropriate or not, I found this. He wrote, doubtless it too would contribute something to history, but a later chronicler must speak of this. And so I realized, well, yes, I am that person. I must speak of this. And so I did. And so we are actually co authors of Focus on Why, using his words alongside mine. And I have taken excerpts from that journal. He's a young 20 something at the time of writing who's exploring what it means to be a soldier in this war and what it means to live out 5 years as a prisoner, to explore areas of writing, to become a writer, and to understand what meaning there is to life and what his purpose is. So, yeah, like I
Wow.
couldn't have had a better co-author, to be honest.
That, I mean, that story, I mean, I've read it in the book, and but that the way you tell that story, and I'm sure, listeners felt that too, showing the actual diary. And I think I can see how this has influenced you in the most amazing way, inspired you, has fed your work, but also that idea of purpose in extreme circumstances, in the most harsh environments, the most difficult of challenges, challenges we sometimes think of in our work every day, but real challenges of being a prisoner and not being able to have choice on your destiny, but still talking about purpose. I can see how powerful this is. And thank you so much for sharing that story, of how you've co-authored this book together. And it sounds like you had an incredibly special relationship with your grandfather. And, I know that part of your work is talking about bridging generations.
Yeah.
I know this is a real and present, issue in some workplaces. There are, multiple generations, and increasingly so. They talk about 5 generations coming into the workplace. I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on this? What are the ways to bridge those generations in the workplace?
It's so important to do that, to understand that at the heart of it, there are a lot more commonalities between us than we realize. The holding ourselves a prisoner, which is why the literal prison that he is in is also a metaphor in many ways, that we hold ourselves prisoner. And what I mean by that is that we are holding ourselves prisoner by our own limitations. I spoke there about my limiting belief that I couldn't possibly write a book from his perspective. And yet, that was just me stopping myself from exploring and choosing to step into that space. What is happening in the workplace is you've got people who are exposed to so many different areas of communication. To understand at the core of it, we're all experiencing emotions, we're all struggling with different things, we're all coming from different perspectives, but essentially we feel the same, not the same literally, but the same emotions will be playing out. So what I wanted to show with my grandfather and use that story is he was experiencing the things that we experience now. It's why Shakespeare is still so current, because human emotion doesn't necessarily change. It's the situations change, but actually they can be replicated and they can be seen through a different lens. But it is a case of, it's so true that each experience that we're facing, someone has been in that environment or has felt that emotion, but we can't feel exactly what you feel. The empathy could be there, but we can't experience it in the same way. But I can understand what is going on. So the different generations, each one is there almost to disrupt the one before. We're there to challenge one another. We're there to challenge the status quo, and we're all doing that in our different ways. So what I love is about how this generational wisdom, if we just hear the perspectives, if we just take the time to listen to what each other has to say, there is so much to be taken from what has happened before, the history, the time, to really bring that into what we can then do together. And it is a collaborative effort. This, the work that Hofstadter does in terms of understanding the culture in different businesses or different countries, the paradigms that we have, we've all got these unique perspectives that come to play, regardless of the country that we've got in, what we've experienced, education. Every single person is unique in layering all of their experiences. So it's such a rich, diverse experience to bring that to the table. And I just don't feel that people are listening. They're so busy speaking. And I'm
Yeah.
very conscious that that's me speaking right now. But it is a case of listen, listen more, and reflect. I have a reflection with action process that is so useful in a business environment, but also in every moment. Reflection is where your why is. It's where the meaningful significance is. And the purpose piece is where you then put your purpose into motion. So reflection with action. So reflection is the why, the meaningful significance. The action is where the purpose is put into motion. The combination of those is understanding that in every moment you have a choice to assign that meaning. It may come up that you have an emotion. You may feel angry or frustrated with something that's happened in the office, but then you can choose a different meaning, which then will affect the flow of events thereafter. So understanding that it is, and this comes back to why many people are not fulfilled in their work, is that they're not choosing a secondary meaning. They're sticking with the original one, and then it's not serving them, but they have a choice. You always
Yeah.
have a choice. And that's what I
That's,
really want to
I'm
bring.
just, I love that. And I think what I'm hearing the themes of are definitely listening. I heard collaboration as well, which is actually quite important when we're talking about those generational differences. It can feel like actually either one side feels like they have the experience or the knowledge to share with others, but it can be both ways, right? It's a co-creation process. And I hear that idea, which I also use in my own work about pausing and not just jumping to the immediate interpretation, decoding of the meaning. Amy, this has been such a rich and really fascinating conversation with me, learning more about your work, sharing more about your work. I have one last question for you before we wrap up, which is, you know, purpose sometimes is people look backwards. They look backwards to what is, the roots or what has been driving me, what has been my motivations. But also purpose is what is forwards, right? Legacy. And so I'm really curious for you. You have this amazing book, Focus on Why, a 500 episode or over 500 episodes of the podcast, which is truly amazing. What does purpose look like to you? If I look forward 10 years from now, what would that purpose and legacy look like from your point of view?
Well, given how much it has evolved over the last 5 years, I know what it will be in the foreseeable future, but I couldn't possibly imagine what 10 years will bring because so much can happen that will take me in. I talk about a path of blending euthymia and eudaimonia. And that's about trusting that you're on the right path and that it's a worthwhile one to be treading. Because as long as I'm aligned with what matters to me, it will be the right path. So, very much a living legacy is what I talk about. Seeing the impact I'm making, knowing that I am on the right path for me right now, is understanding what matters, that I'm not outsourcing that somebody should really do something about, fill in the dots of concern there. I'm actually doing it and I'm living that. So I get to see the legacy that I'm creating, part of it. There are many things that I don't get to see, but what I do know is that it will involve the purpose work that I have. it will involve helping people to understand what meaningful success is for them, and that it doesn't have to be the one that is marketed mostly by the one that is consumer driven. It is
Mm.
very much a case of understanding what matters for you as an individual and as a family and collectively, but and knowing that you have the choice to challenge that, that you don't
Mm.
have to go along with the crowd. I'm very much a case of stepping outside and really looking at what it is that's different. So my legacy, 500 episodes into the podcast, it will continue. There are more stories that need to be shared. There are more people whose purpose needs a platform, and that will continue. Why do I do that? Because this planet has got some incredible people who are doing incredible work, and I love sharing it with them. I love sharing their work. You've been one of those guests on the show, and thank you for that. So yes, this is unfinished business. I really do feel like I am continuing my grandfather's legacy, because there are now people who didn't live in the or didn't walk on the same time as the earth as he did, and yet they now know his name. And that is a beautiful thing to really think about, that
Mm.
your name is bringing people, or you are bringing people together even though you are no longer on the planet.
Fantastic. Well, Amy, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I love the way that you have answered these questions, shared your insights, your knowledge, your own personal experiences and stories. And I personally have found this very inspiring. I'm sure our listeners have as well. I would love to invite you to share, just as we wrap up now, how can people find out more about your work and learn more about what you do?
Very simply, they can go to my website, amyrowlinson.com. The podcast is called Focus on Why. It's available on all platforms. And I'm most active on LinkedIn as a social media platform. So please reach out there. And the book, again, is also Focus on Why. And it's available on all different mediums. So you can listen to it as an audiobook, an ebook, or the actual paperback.
Amazing. Well, we'll put all of those links in the show notes. But thank you so much, Amy. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and I greatly enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And look forward to seeing everybody next time.